is 2009. A teenager watches Murvy Mering's proto-mapping video on World War I. Dissatisfied with the fact that it had several inaccuracies, he decided to make an improved version of the video and upload it to his channel. This teenager is none other than Emperor Tigerstar, and this decision and subsequent upload is where proto-mapping and video mapping split. On one path are animated maps mostly meant to be factual and educational, with some exceptions. On the other path are maps with countries that speak and have personalities of their own. Video mapping, if it is counted as mapping, boosts the subscriber count for mapping channels by about 1 million, as it eventually became more popular than mapping. For example, Emperor Tigerstar has over 500,000 subscribers today, while other video mapping channels like Algol have subscriber counts approaching or exceeding 100,000. Meanwhile, the most subscribed mapper today, Kiev Mapping, only has about 50,000 subscribers. Why is this? Well, it is incredibly likely that mainstream audiences prefer videos where the intent is for history to be explained through just a shifting of borders rather than by countries that can talk and have their own emotions. Video mappers also tend to be able to cover current events more easily because their format is more conducive toward it, so people who want to check out news on wars and international disputes are drawn toward those channels. I am bringing this up because I didn't discuss it in the last episode, and it is incredibly important to know, as this is where the more popular video mapping and more underground Murvy Mering style mapping diverge from each other, and it is where the intent of mapping is made clear. It is first and foremost for entertainment, not coverage of history or global crises. Keep this in mind while we continue to explore the history of mapping. A year after Emperor Tigerstar sparked the genre of video mapping, Murvy Mering became the first true mapper upon the upload of the History of Europe Part 1, Ancient History. The video employed smoother animation than his proto-mapping video, but like its predecessor, employed red and blue as war colors, highlighted speaking countries, placed text outside of countries, and, of course, employed alternate history, which has literally been around since antiquity. Murvy Mering would continue to release videos for this series, ultimately amounting to 10 videos produced between July of 2010 and July of 2012. By that time, his series had caught the attention of many new creators. One of them was 99Batron. He was the next most important figure in the mapping community after Murvy Mering. This is for two reasons, those being that he continued Murvy Mering's series after its final episode, and that he created the Future of Europe's wiki. 99Batron first started his continuation of Murvy Mereng's series about a month after it had ended. He had previously been a gaming creator, only getting a few hundred views per video at most. Upon uploading the first episode of the continuation, he began to get thousands and even tens of thousands of views. Many people in the mapping community regarded him as the official fan continuation of Murvy Mereng's series and considered his style as the closest to Murvy Mereng's. After starting his continuation series, 99Batron founded the Future of Europe's wiki on October 7, 2012 as a tribute to Murvy Mering. The wiki gained popularity in the budding mapping community and was given a nickname Mapperdonia by the community members, which eventually applied to the whole community instead of just the wiki. It also appealed to many early mappers such as Dmod, Mr. Owner and Pwner, and Map Animator, and they became leading figures on the wiki. It is also here where we begin to see the evolution of the mapping style again. Previously, it had been typical to highlight a country that was speaking in gray, which is what Murvy Mering and Dmod did. However, 99Batron and Mr. Owner and Pwner began to use white to highlight speaking countries instead, which is now the standard for mapping. While it seems incredibly mundane, I find it interesting that the style of mapping was evolving that quickly. A lot of these creators were still asserting that their series were inspired by Murvy Mereng's work, but at the same time they were developing their own style of video production little by little. The Future of Europe's wiki was and still is also employed as a subscriber database. Upon the beginning of record keeping, Dmod was the most subscribed creator, followed by Emperor Jar Jar and Mr. Owner and Pwner. The records kept on the wiki provide a pretty good indication for the evolution of mapping. Dmod was toppled in the subscriber ranks by Mr. Owner and Pwner in August of 2014, after which Mr. Owner and Pwner was surpassed by NickHD Mapping, who was also the first mapper to surpass 10,000 subscribers in October of 2015. NickHD Mapping's series indicated what basic mapping had become 5 years after Murvy Mering had started his series. Hand-drawn countries had been replaced by pre-installed borders, a date indicator was now being used, and a text box had been implemented in place of the floating text previously employed by mappers. I would argue that NickHD was the first modern mapper if it hadn't been for a slightly later, even more groundbreaking creator, Void Viper Mapping. Void Viper first began mapping on December 6, 2014. His mapping style was very similar to NickHD's, who had started mapping a couple weeks earlier. However, Void Viper would do something that NickHD would not. Void Viper would begin to employ country balls on March 5, 2015. Void Viper was not the first creator to do this though. Instead, that was a guy called Immardus back in October 2014. The reason why I credit Void Viper with revolutionizing mapping instead of Immardis is for two reasons. Void Viper had the popularity to actively change the mapping landscape, and he had no scandals under his belt. Immardis, for his part, quit mapping after releasing a video with homophobic undertones and would not release a mapping video ever again. He was last heard from in 2020 by the Plant Boss career Colin before going dark for good. Anyway, Void Viper grew in popularity with his videos featuring country balls and would eventually make a movie of one of his series that would garner almost 4 million views. But I'll talk about that more in the next episode of this series. Before I finish talking about Void Viper, though, there is one incredibly important thing to know about him. He revolutionized the way wars were represented in videos. On January 18th, 2015, Void Viper started his series titled Alternate Future of Frozen Europe, and in the very first episode, he made a major change to how he drew wars. He colored belligerent countries a dark shade of red or blue to represent the country itself, and then used lighter shades of those colors to represent occupied territory or advances. In doing this, Void Viper made war sequences much more fluid and easier to understand. This idea would be adopted by creators such as Romanian mapping and Japanese mapping not long afterward, and has now become the standard for war sequences in modern mapping. Before I move on to the next creator, let's turn our attention back to the subscriber records on the Future of Europe's wiki. After about a year at the top, Nick HD mapping was surpassed by Dylan's World in October of 2016. Dylan's World spent less than 2 months as the most subscribed creator before being surpassed by Super LV mapping in December of 2016. Super LV spent 2.5 months as the most subscribed creator before being surpassed by the next creator that we'll talk about. Romanian mapping is the final massive creator who got his start in this period that we'll talk about. He uploaded his first mapping video on February 23, 2016 and quickly gained a lot of popularity. After surpassing Super LV mapping, Romanian mapping became the most subscribed creator just 1 year and 1 day after starting his channel, right at the beginning of a mapping golden age, but that is also for the next episode. I want to talk about the evolution of mapping during this time period for a bit. The time between 2012 and 2016 saw the most rapid evolution in mapping than any other period in the history of the genre. During this period, mapping went from a simplistic style created by Murvy Mering to a much more complicated style refined by Void Viper mapping and Nick HD mapping. It now featured country balls, date indicators, text boxes, and more fluid war sequences, improving the appearance and intricacy of mapping content. Only 4 years prior, none of this stuff was in use. But there's still more to talk about in terms of mapping's evolution up to this point. Mapping began to have serious plot lines. This would become much more evident later on in mapping's history, but mapping was no longer solely meant to be funny. In fact, funny mapping content began to be less and less common. This isn't a problem at all, but rather shows that mapping was beginning to be regarded as a serious storytelling format by the mapping community. This will be crucial during the mapping golden age, the time period of the next episode of this series. Then there's an elephant in the room we need to address, the Polish mapping community. Of any country, Poland has the most mappers, more than more populated countries like the United States or Germany. To understand this, we need to look at the origin of Poland Ball. Poland Ball is an even more common genre on YouTube than mapping and video mapping combined, and has individual creators approaching amounts of subscribers in the millions. As such, there are a ton of creators, many of whom hail from Poland, where the meme originated. A lot of these creators either eventually branched into mapping or started as mappers before also including country ball content, but no matter how they got started, there are still more Polish mappers than from any other country. Due to this, the Polish mapping community is considered distinct from the main mapping community and is the only community that typically posts in a language other than English, as it is so large and so respected by the main mapping community that it is essentially allowed to do whatever it wants. The Polish side of the community first came about with Map Animators channel and would later proliferate alongside the main mapping community, especially during the golden age and the pandemic, as we'll see in later episodes. So you may be wondering why I'm talking about them now as opposed to later because of this. I'm mentioning them now because they're nearly as old as the main mapping community, but like the main mapping community have many of their most prolific creators come about later on. Additionally, they are the first major sub-community in mapping to develop, with this mostly being due to culture and language instead of later reasons such as style. A similar development took place in the mid-2010s with the introduction of the Hispanic mapping community, which, while not as large as the Polish community, is still large enough to deserve being mentioned. So at this point, we see the rapid evolution and growth of the mapping community. The style is evolving more rapidly than at any other point in the history of mapping. Multiple sub-communities are beginning to find their roots here, and creators are getting bigger and bigger. This hints at the explosive growth of creators during the mapping golden age that we'll talk about next episode and during the COVID-19 pandemic, which we'll talk about in the episode after the next. For now, though, mapping is on the cusp of something bigger and will grow much more popular than we saw in this episode.